Today, big news in the state's sex abuse scandal. Alvarez summoned before the Legislative Committee. Plus,
today I am presenting a budget that is a blueprint for how we continue to build a more secure and inclusive middle class in New Jersey.
Another budget, another tax hike. Governor Murphy delivers his second budget address with a call for more millionaires to pay their fair share. Could we be headed for another battle in Trenton? And we'll hear from the governor's chief of staff, George Helmy, as he takes over in office dealing with all of these issues. We'll also hear from the A-plus panel, former Democratic Assemblyman John Wisniewski, Republican strategist Jeanette Hoffman, and Dan Cassino of the Fairleigh Dickinson University Poll. It's all ahead on New Jersey Now.
Thank you. May God bless the great state of New Jersey and its great people and the United States of America.
Good afternoon, I'm Diane Doctor, and welcome to New Jersey Now. It's been a big week in Trenton. Our governor laid out his budget, but first we had some breaking news overnight into today, and that is the story that we've been following for you, this Alvarez, who has been accused by one of Governor Murphy's former staffers of sexual assault during the campaign, has not been charged with it, has agreed to testify in the legislative committee that's been investigating him. And so for newsmakers, I guess we're lucky enough to have John Wisniewski here with us. If this was your committee, what would you ask Alvarez next week?
Well, I think the focus of the investigation at this point with Al ought to be, how did you get hired? What was the process? Was there a letter you sent in saying, I'd like to be considered? Did you get a phone call? Who was it from? What did you have to submit? What was the vetting process? Did anybody ask you about any events that might disqualify you? I think there's a whole hour or two of questions that the committee can ask him that hopefully will answer that, the big question, who hired Al?
And then what happens after that, Jeanette?
Well, it's interesting to see where this committee goes, Diane. As John said, I think the big question is, who hired you, Al Alvarez? And no one has been able to answer that question. No one on the transition team, no one who works for Governor Murphy, no one on the campaign, everyone who subpoenas said, I don't know. But, this committee started out about, the allegations and a cover-up, basically, of what happened to Katie Brennan, sexual assault. But I think it's taking a new direction with Al Alvarez testifying of the hiring practices of Governor Murphy. Specifically, a week or two ago, we heard about the SDA and some very alarming the School Development Authority, and some very alarming patronage allegations that 38 people were hired there that seemed to be unqualified. A lot of them all related to each other. Another person.
Shocking political patronage in New Jersey.
Yes, exactly.
But
it seems really egregious. It seems really egregious in the School Development Authority, where Al Alvarez also worked. So it seems to think that this new committee interrogating Al Alvarez might take a life of its own, as sometimes these committees do. Former chairman of the Assembly Legislative Investigative Committee under Bridgegate, would know a lot about that, John. So it should be interesting to see how this all unravels.
And Dan, we've talked before about how the public really hasn't registered in on this. It's not an issue. And you've said it's a diversion for the governor.
Exactly. So at this point, when we run polls in this, Monmouth just had a poll out earlier this week, and nobody's paying any attention to this issue at all. It's only people who are already paying a lot of attention to New Jersey politics, and those people have already made up their minds. So this isn't changing anyone's mind about it. What it does to me doing, however, is turning off some middle-of-the-road voters. That is, voters who don't pay a lot of attention to politics. They hear about the scandal and go, why am I even worrying about this? And it just reinforces the idea that New Jersey politics is this irredeemable cesspool, and it's a terrible place, and no one should get involved in it. The SDA is really example one of this, where it's not only that all these people were hired, it's that 24 long-term professional staffers were fired in what looks like to be a clearing out of the professionals as a dumping ground for people they wanted to give jobs to.
And just to clarify, why is the SDA so important in terms of patronage?
Well, SDA is important in terms of patronage because it's a lot of jobs, and it's a lot of money, and they don't actually do a whole lot that anyone can point to.
But don't they give out contracts.
They give out lots of contracts
that are very, very lucrative.
Yeah, so there's a lot of money there, and if I am someone who is interested in influencing other companies in New Jersey, this is a very good place for me to do that from. However, again, it's one of those agencies where we have it in New Jersey. No one's 100% sure why we actually have this agency there, or what. And since semi-independent authority, they have a lot of discretion. And in politics, people think it's about budget. It's not about the budget. It's about discretion. That's having money and having no one to tell you what to do with it.
And some people are already calling for the SDA to be completely abolished. Two New Jersey newspapers, the South Jersey Times, I believe, the Star Ledger, said, let's just get rid of it. I mean, this has been around since, what, 2000, since Republicans, I think, since the Whitman administration.
But, you know, the question is, all right, if you abolish the School Development Authority, who's going to administer the money to build the schools that we need built?
It could be also worse.
Right. I mean, be careful of what you ask for. Right. And the other question, I mean, in fairness, look, the optics look really bad, the relationship some of the hires have with the leader of the agency. But I think we ought to look at what is the pattern with these agencies. I can't believe that there was any difference in what happened when Governor Christie took office after defeating Governor Corzine. And so is this something that happens every time there's a change in administration? I mean, that's something that has to be looked at as well, not just looking in a small sense what happened in this case, what happened in all of the agencies, how are they run, what is the use of those agencies?
Right, and I believe Governor Murphy put out a letter, I think, you know, investigating the hiring practices in all the agencies and seeing what the patronage situation was. And I think this committee may take on a life of its own in you know, in an inquiry about the SDA and kind of what happened there.
In the midst of all of this, Governor Murphy presented his budget this week, and top of the ticket was his attempt to revive the millionaires tax.
While our middle class is trying to figure out where their tax relief went, those at the very top are shouldering less and less of their fair share of the tax burden. That's the opposite of tax fairness. Let's work together to apply the millionaires tax to every millionaire.
Last year he tried and ended up with a tax on those 5 million. That's the really, really high level. Now he'd like to take that to the lower level millionaires, of which there are, what, about 17,000, and plus another 20,000 or so that don't live in the state but would pay that rate.
Right.
So you're talking about a small amount of people who would pay an enormous amount of money, $500 million in revenue. And so why shouldn't we do this? What's wrong with it? Okay.
We should do it. And when I was in the legislature, on a number of occasions, I had the opportunity to vote for it. Governor Christie vetoed all of those efforts. The legislative leaders that we have, some of them were in office then, they voted for it. I don't buy the notion that because of what the president did with the federal tax program, it makes a difference in New Jersey. Remember this, when we did the gas tax and other things, we cut $2 billion in revenue from the state of New Jersey. That's one of the reasons why we have a revenue problem. We cut so much, now we have to make up for it.
What do you think, Jeanette?
I don't think we cut so much. We increased spending by 8% just last year. I mean, Democratic leaders in New Jersey, the Senate President and the Speaker of the Assembly, are smart enough to know they once supported the millionaires tax, and now they're saying, no, this is bad fiscal policy. The people who can leave will leave. I was just with some business owners that I represent who said it's as easy for me to spend an extra couple weeks in my house in Florida, you know, and we'll do that. And revenues are down from the 5 millionaires tax. Now we're cutting it down to a millionaires tax. What's next year? You know, half millionaires tax? It's really just getting so excessive in New Jersey. We're so unaffordable. We have the highest taxes in the country. I think the general electorate is just so tired of New Jersey being so unaffordable. And let's face it, we're just not getting the services that we're paying for here. So I think the Democratic leaders, I think Governor Murphy's going to have a problem in his own party with his millionaires tax getting done.
Even though those people supported it during the Christie era.
They did, and now they're against it.
Just to your point, you said, you know, people said, well, I can spend more time at my house in Florida. For most of the people in the state of New Jersey for whom this would benefit, the idea of having a house in Florida in addition to having a house in New Jersey is a fantasy. And so when people already have a house in Florida, this is not something that's making a distinction for them.
But if the revenue's not there, then who do we tax? Do we go after the middle class?
Every millionaire is not leaving the state.
Not every millionaire, but if the number that you're counting on, they're leaving and they're not expanding their businesses in New Jersey, because that is also the point, because these are business owners. They're not just millionaires for the sake of being millionaires, they're also business owners. They're not expanding their operations in New Jersey. It's bad fiscal policy, and the Senate President and the Assembly Speaker know that.
It's a nice anecdote. There's no factual backup for it.
I'm going to give Dan the last word.
So we actually have had an increase in the number of millionaires we have living in New Jersey, but of course millionaires are very mobile, and if they feel like they're being taxed too much, they could move. Will they? We don't have any data on that because it's such a small sample, we can't actually poll them very well. So we have no idea, and also people always say they're going to move. I mean, if everyone who said they're going to move, Donald Trump got elected president, actually moved, New Jersey would be half empty at this point. So we don't know if people are actually going to move. People do respond to taxes, but at this point, Governor Murphy's really boxed in. He needs a lot of extra money. It's not clear where this money is coming from. The only politically palatable thing to do is to tax the wealthy because poor people don't have any money. You can't really tax them.
Okay, on that note, these guys are going to go away for just a few minutes. We're going to go away, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Governor Murphy's Chief of Staff. Stay tuned. Next, we'll hear from Governor Murphy's new right-hand man, Chief of Staff George Helmy, about the budget and so much more. Stay tuned. We're back with George Helmy, Chief of Staff to Governor Murphy, newly anointed Chief of Staff, fresh from the Cory Booker legislative office in the state. Nice to have you with us. And,
thank you for having me.
Some would say you gave up a real nice, cushy job for a real tough job with Governor Murphy coming in at this time, budget week, and you probably heard what our panelists were talking about. So make the case for that millionaire's tax. Here, you've got the floor.
Look, I think what the governor presented was really a middle-class budget, a blueprint for the middle class, as he's called it, which makes the investment in all the things that bring young families to the towns that we were just talking about and grows the middle class and makes the investments in things that we all care about. Not only invest in the middle class, educate our children, and get people to and from work, which brings more people and more business to New Jersey.
What about the theory that this will drive people away from New Jersey?
I don't think there's any data that shows that. As one of the panelists said, there's more millionaires in New Jersey. And look, we have a decision to make. Are we going to be investing in pre-K? Are we going to be investing in our public schools? Are we going to be investing in community, colleges, and higher education, and the NJ Transit that matters to hundreds of thousands of New Jerseyans? Yes. How are we going to pay for that? And there's got to be a sustainable revenue. And what this budget presents is a sustainable revenue source and less of a dependence on these one-shots and diversions, which we know not only cripple our budgetary capability, but impact us on the rating agencies.
Now, our viewers might be surprised to know that the biggest opposition to the millionaire's tax comes from his own party. How will you convince them that this is the right thing to do?
You know, look, I think there's, an understandable hesitation on taxes. Everybody should be hesitant and thoughtful when we are going to be taxing New Jerseyans more. At the same time, we have to be thoughtful about the investments that we are making. And so the conversation is how are we going to pay for the things that we all agree on? And let's not lose the perspective of the governor presented a budget, a Democratic governor presented a budget that had $1.1 billion in sustainable savings, year-over-year sustainable savings. So we talked about the savings part first, we talked about the investments that we all agree on, and then we got to figure out how we want to pay for it. And as the governor said in his own speech, he said, this is not the budget that I expect I'm going to sign at the end of the day. We're going to work with the legislative branch leaders in both parties, in both chambers, and figure out how we do that.
So how far would he be prepared to retrench on that tax? Do you think last year he wanted the same thing? He ended up compromising and taxing people over $5 million. Would he say, let's do $3 million this year and $1 million down the road?
Look, I don't think this is a big tax. There's less than 20,000 New Jerseyans that pay for it. It's about $500 million in new revenues.
To them, it's a big tax.
I think it's $500 million in revenues, and to the other 9 million New Jerseyans that want to see advancements in pre-K and higher ed, and the trains and buses that take us to and from work, they're going to be looking at how you're going to pay for that long term and not put it back on the ratepayers.
So does that mean that he won't move off of his position?
I won't negotiate here. We're a few days away. We're a few days away from our budget address. But if you look at the millionaire's tax, first of all, it's widely popular among Democrats and Republicans, north, south, east, west of the state. So I want to negotiate based on principle, what we want to achieve, and then how we go about doing that.
So the door's open to negotiation then?
The door's always open with negotiation. As the executive branch, you always have to negotiate with the legislature. The budget's going to start in the Assembly. And to say that I'm not open to negotiation, I think diminishes, how much I respect Craig Coughlin and Steve Sweeney individually, but also as leaders of their chambers.
Okay, so let's move on to the topic near and dear to my heart, New Jersey Transit, which was also part of the governor's budget.
Yes.
And to his credit, he has put it front and center, and he's put his face on it, which some might say is a mistake, because there hasn't been an improvement that the people who ride the trains, myself included, can see on a day-to-day basis. So why can't we just attack some of the things that touch people.
Yeah.
Things like communications, better communications, for example.
I think it's totally a fair assessment that we can and should be doing a better job on a number of fronts. I would say that from where NJ Transit was and the divestment from NJ Transit over a significant period of time, and I'm not a blame game guy. We could all sit here for hours and say who's to blame the budgets that crippled and decimated NJ Transit. I'm a solutions-based guy, and I want to say we could definitely do better in certain areas. But where NJ Transit was when we took over, and the capital that we are infusing for capital projects, things that make the commuter's life easier, engineers, and actually trains that run. Yet we're doing a heck of a job.
And those are things that people hear, but they don't see the results immediately.
Yeah.
Some things that could be done immediately, things just like shoveling the snow off the steps at the train stations, things that are just easy, like letting people know 2 hours or 3 hours ahead of time,
yeah.
or explaining why 40 crews don't show up for trains in a snowstorm. Nobody hears that. All we hear about is these big picture, future, it'll be rosy down the road, don't worry, just hang on. Yet it does not improve from day to day.
Again, I think that, again, as somebody, as I told you, who took the train to work for 7 years of my life, I totally appreciate and get that. Again, from where we were and where we are, significantly better. I disagree that people aren't seeing.
From where the Murphy administration was?
No, I think from where we as New Jerseyans and commuters of the train 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 3 years ago, is significantly better. There's data to prove that. We are bringing engineers and equipment back online from years of divestment. Are there things we could be doing better to solve tomorrow? Yes, and I know that Kevin and others there and Diane are working very hard on doing that.
I think people would appreciate seeing him on a train in the morning, a real rush hour train,
yeah.
and Penn Station in what we call the pit of Penn Station, where the commuters are forced to choose at the last minute, depending on which train happens to show up the track and rush towards it. If he could experience some of that, would you consider, since he reports to you in some way, right? He's a commissioner.
Kevin is an incredible man, an incredible professional. I think Kevin's pretty visible, and I know Diane is also very visible. You know who is on the train a lot? Phil Murphy.
Right, but he rides that one line, and he doesn't necessarily ride at rush hour, and it's very sporadic. Riding it every day,
yeah.
getting in there in the trenches with the people
yeah.
that have to ride it, and listening to them. No one that rides that train has faith in this governor's ability to fix it.
I disagree. So as somebody, again, who I've ridden the train 7 years of my life, except since I took this job with Phil Murphy, anybody who knows the challenges that NJ Transit faced, both from a policy perspective as someone who did this in federal policy for 5 years, and again as a commuter on NJ Transit for 7, I'm very well aware of the challenges that we face. I think in my conversations, I know, in my conversations with those folks who are getting on our trains and buses, things are improving, but you're not going to fix 10 years of divestment overnight.
Okay, we're going to agree to disagree on this thing.
That's fair.
And just move on to the broader question here. You left Cory Booker, you came to Phil Murphy. So what's that like for you to come from the national stage to the local stage to the state? What's it like day to day? Are you happier?
Yeah. Look, you never leave Cory Booker. You're always part of the family. But I love the job, as I told you and have told others. I'm a governance and policy person first and foremost. Like Phil and Cory, I believe deeply in a purpose and a mission. I think it was Voltaire who said, men and women will be judged for all the good things they didn't do. And so I want to sort of live that life where, we are given back to the generations after us. We talked about our kids a little bit. So I am very happy. I'm enjoying the job. And really, as I said before, the chief of staff role is really a support staff role. I'm surrounded by incredibly good human beings who are working hard every day.
You're very modest. I've heard you say that before in
yeah.
other interviews, but you
yeah.
actually, you oversee them and they work for you.
I do, but I'm a generalist by nature. I can't be the point person on any one thing, and I say it because I believe it. I wake up every day figuring out how to help my department heads and the people in the front office do their jobs better. That's my role.
Well, we hope that you do that very well, because it's in all of our benefit.
Well, thank
and
you.
In the ways that the state touches us, New Jersey Transit and these other things, we're all waiting for improvement, and we're pulling for it to happen.
Thank you.
Whatever party there is, at least I am. Nice to meet you, George Helmy. Thanks for stopping in. We know you're really busy, so we're going to let you go.
Thank you for having me.
And then we're going to bring back all those people. We're going to talk about you behind your back and what
Thank
you
you
said.
so much for having me.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Next, the A+ panel reacts to George Helmy when we return. Stay tuned. We're back, and y'all heard the interview. So do you think there's some wiggle room on this millionaires tax? It sounded like they were positioning for a compromise John Wisniewski.
Well, I think there's wiggle room on the overall budget. I think it's premature to start saying this particular piece will change or that particular piece. The governor said, different from last year, this is a negotiation. I think that was well received by the legislative leaders. Now, there are different pieces. There are a lot of moving pieces in this budget, and I think they're going to look for things that he didn't talk about that they're going to want in there, and so maybe there's an opportunity to compromise somewhere in this.
Jeanette?
There's no appetite for new taxes out there, and I think the legislative leaders know that. I think Republicans and Democrats in the legislature want to do everything they can not to raise taxes, and they're going to present a budget plan to the governor on June 30th. That's a constitutional deadline to get our budget passed that doesn't increase taxes, at least by a lot. So whether the governor's going to accept that or not remains to be seen, but I liked his tone in the speech, as John said, and I think George Helmy, as the new chief of staff, is really encouraging a collegial tone among the legislators, and I think that's going to go a long way. So we'll see.
Dan?
Look, I actually think this is a very positive sign. It's a positive sign because if we go to a state like our neighbor to the north in New York, there's no discussion of this beforehand. It is all worked out behind closed doors between the governor and the head of the legislature, and nobody has any input into what's going on. But this is democracy in action. The governor says, I want this, the state legislature wants something else.
Oh, no,
and
you
they're
don't.
going to fight it, and they're going to fight it out.
Yeah.
And that's good for everyone, that we really get this discussion about what our priorities are and where that money needs to go.
Last word, you got 10 seconds. New Jersey Transit.
We need more money. Kudos to the governor for 25 million more. We need about 100 million more.
Jeanette?
Of New Jersey Transit,
Yeah.
we need more accountability. I mean, like you said, Diane, it's the simple things that need to get done. There needs to be better communications to the riders, clear the snow, fix the escalators. Let's get the low-hanging fruit done, and let's do this right, and let's fix it.
Bravo, Jeanette. Dan?
At this point, we have almost a cultural problem in New Jersey Transit. It's going to take a long time to turn it around, and all the money in the world is not going to help unless you can fix that cultural problem.
Okay, well, I'm available for consultation on that. All that. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us for another edition of New Jersey Now. I'm Diane Doctor. Have a great day.